Welcome to SDS Thursday. Really good to see you all again tonight. My name is Dr. Julia Budnik. I am one of the directors of SDS seminars, and SDS Thursdays are brought to you by SDS Seminars. We are a UK-based company specializing in training mental health practitioners in postgrad training, continuous professional development, in various topical areas of psychology, psychotherapy. We've been running this SDS Thursdays since probably March 2020. As soon as the first lockdown was announced, we started running SDS Thursdays. And to start with, it was just to see people's faces, to say we are still here, and to see that you are still here and we are still trying to help each other. And then we felt that it was a good way to connect with you and to tell us what we do as a company, as a psychotherapy training company, and also to discuss some of the issues which are cropping up in the press about our field, maybe some research publications and so on, sometimes sharing techniques. So these Thursdays are sort of, they have many purposes, so they're not just for promotion. So we know we have people who are joining us from all around the world, but I always ask you to still take your keyboard and start typing and let us know a little bit about yourself. I'll put my chat on. I can see that some people already writing. Thank you so much. So we are always interested where you are in the world, where you are in the country or in the world. What kind of setting you're working in. Are you a private practitioner or you're working as part of a team? Maybe you work for a charity. Do you work with children or with adults? And so on. So the setting you're working in. I am always interested whether you've attended SDS Thursdays before, or it is your first one. And if it is your first one, how did you discover us? How did you find out about us? If you remember, whether it was an advert in a magazine, or your supervisor maybe recommended it, or your colleague. So whichever way you've discovered us, please let us know. It's always very, very interesting for us. And of course, if you're here for the first time, you can catch up with previous SDS Thursdays on YouTube. Because as I said, we've been running them for 3 years now. Yes, it's probably third anniversary, pretty much, isn't it, Paul? And so we've been running them for 3 years, and we've been very faithfully putting all the recordings on our YouTube channel. Just give me a moment, I will share the YouTube channel link with you, because I'm not daring to share my screen, because Zoom for some reason throws me out as soon as I try to do that. So I will not bother you with shared screen. I will just put the link to our YouTube channel to the chat box. And if you're watching it as a recording, you probably already found it on the YouTube channel, but if not, I will put a link here, so you will be able to scan a QR code. If you're new to SDS seminars, I will put a link here to find SDS website, to know where we are. But I guess you probably signed up to SDS seminars in order to receive the invitation to this Thursday, so you probably all know our web address and your way around our website. So today we will be talking about GAD, Generalized Anxiety Disorder. And my next question to you would be, do you come across clients with generalized anxiety disorder and with anxieties broader? And again, same question, are they young people? Are they older people, do you notice any tendencies? Have you noticed that the age group of people with anxiety may be changing? Or maybe not at all, maybe the gender, maybe you started seeing more men with anxiety or not. So anything you observe and experience in your practice would be very interesting. Interesting to me and interesting to Paul, to our presenter tonight, my co-director, Paul Grantham, and the founder of SDS Seminars. Paul, can you say something to us so people can spot you on the screen?
Hi, folks.
There he is.
Good to see you all this evening. Although it is a extremely windy and rainy evening here in East Sussex, I enjoy the warmth of our community here. It's always easier to tolerate terribly bad weather when you have a sea of smiling and hopefully engaged and stimulated faces in front of you. So I hope you're going to find this evening interesting and useful as well. Of course, that it stimulates you to sign up for the main training on generalized anxiety disorder that I'm running in about, when am I running it? Next month sometime?
Next month. I've just put the link into the chat box, and I will do it again because Paul will be running a 2-day course on GAD, on generalized anxiety disorder. And this course, although it is part of SDS Master Practitioner Diploma in CBT, but you can book it as a standalone training. You don't have to book the whole diploma. So if you work with anxiety clients and would like to do this particular training with Paul, there's no reason why you can't book it on its own. So I've put the link there, and I'll tell you it's on the 25th and 26th of April. And at the moment, we still have early bird discount for the course. So you're saving £95 before VAT. And the discount expires on the 24th of March, which is tomorrow. So it expires tomorrow. It still runs tomorrow, but at midnight it will expire. So that's a very good saving on that 2-day course. So that's the link. And I believe that Paul has prepared something interesting for you to make sure that you're engaged tonight. And I think it's 7:08, Paul, and although people are still coming, I think I will pass the microphone to you so you could start, and I will look after the waiting room. And hopefully I will lock the room maybe in 2-3 minutes, and then we can run your quiz. Yeah? Okay.
Thanks very much, Julie.
Grantham.
Hi, folks. And as I've already said, good evening. Good to see you all here and engaged and interested. If I can just start off, it suddenly crossed my mind that it was probably worth saying a little bit about why we have given 2 days to looking at generalized anxiety disorder, if only because quite a number of the anxiety problems that we provide training on are single-day events. Not all of them, but most of them tend to be, and this one isn't. So I think it's quite useful to say why that actually is, as well, I guess, as giving you a very brief introduction if you're not familiar with the term. I have actually come across in the past people who misunderstand what generalized anxiety disorder actually is. I think that I have come across folks who basically perceive it as being about being anxious about everything. That's strictly speaking not true, and it's probably best described, at least in sort of plain language, as chronic and overwhelming worrying. So it's about chronic worry, basically. And I think if you're looking for a shorthand to try and sort of understand it or to make sense of it, I actually think it's quite a useful sort of useful idea. I think the other thing about it is that it's also typically quite pervasive in the sense that, you know, we have other anxiety type problems. where worry is involved, for instance, health anxieties, where people will be having worries about, particularly about their health, and that's separate from this. This is one of the things that I think is quite disabling, really, and distressing for people who are chronic worriers, is that their worries typically may have there may be certain things they worry about more than others, but the thing that's strange about them is in many ways that the nature of the worry is all pervasive. It potentially covers everything. So it's not just one area that individuals tend on the whole to be worrying about. And as I'm sure you can be aware, this has some very, very distressing effects, and also effects, I guess, on functioning as well. I mean, the most obvious one, which I think is extremely common for people who chronically worry to talk about, is basically just difficulty sleeping. And there's partly a reason for that, which is that the process of worry is much less contained, I think, when you're in that sort of state of between being awake and being asleep. We know in other contexts that things like our decision making, for example, and other aspects of what's called executive control, neurological executive control, are much less powerful. So in a sense, our thinking runs away with itself much more readily when people are actually lying there in bed trying to get to sleep. So it crops up in that, but not surprisingly, people who chronically worry often talk about this as being something which surrounds them all the time, really. They don't get a break from it, in inverted commas, in any particular way. They may have certain times when it's more pronounced than others, but generally speaking, this is something which feels, for many people who have this experience, almost part of their identity. And I'll come back probably to that particular point later on, because I think that there are aspects of worry, generally speaking, or chronic worry, which mark it out as being quite different from a lot of other anxiety problems. And that I hope will become clearer over the course of this evening. And it's one of the key reasons, as I say, that I wanted to spend 2 days on this rather than 1 day, because there are some quite specific elements around chronic worry, which I don't think exist in quite the same way with regards to other types of anxiety problems. So knowing how to address it and how to deal with it, I think, is something that requires, I don't think necessarily particularly unique skills, but it's got aspects to it which we don't necessarily come across with other types of anxiety problem. So in terms of how it's been defined, there's a number of definitions around about it. I won't go into diagnostics this evening, we'll do that on the main course, but I just thought I would throw out some statements that have been made over the years about what this actually is. One made by Jack Rachman, back in 2004, was that he described it as an unsuccessful search for safety through worry. I'll come back to this because I think that's a really interesting way of conceptualizing what chronic worry is actually about. An unsuccessful search for safety. And that's got some pretty key implications in ways which I think can often be quite surprising, as we're going to see in a minute. Secondly, Adrian Wells has talked about the centrality within chronic worry of what he terms negative metacognitive beliefs, both about worry itself and about the way in which it should actually be dealt with. Now, if you're not familiar with the term metacognitive, basically what it means is it means beliefs about beliefs, or beliefs about thoughts, or beliefs about cognition. So I'll say a little bit about that, because one of the things that's I think quite interesting about this as a problem, which marks it out in many ways as different from a lot, not all, but a lot of other anxiety problems, is that in a way, there are particular issues about the way in which individuals approach their worry when they chronically worry, which actually makes it more difficult to actually get to grips with and work with. I don't mean by that, by the way, it's impossible in some particular way, but it certainly, I think, means that a lot of the focus that we might have when we're dealing with other types of anxiety problems, most obviously, to be honest with you, the content of what it is that people are anxious about, whether it's health anxieties or whether it's a particular phobia or whatever, is actually of secondary importance in many ways with regards to chronic worry. And so if you focus on the content of what people are actually chronically worrying about, you'll often find that rather than helping them to actually overcome this, what you actually end up doing, if you're not careful, is feeding into it as a particular problem. And I guess the other key thing that's been sort of flagged up in more recent years by Dugas is the idea that central to the idea of chronic worry is the idea of what's called intolerance of uncertainty. And I'll say a little bit more about that as well. It's again not unique to this as a problem. It does crop up with other types of or certain other types of anxiety-based problems, probably most commonly with OCD. But having said that, I think again it's something that requires particular attention, and maybe not purely in the way in which I think people have attempted to deal with it in the past. So what I wanted to do, having set the scene on that, really was to have an opportunity for a quiz about this, and simply because I thought that it would be quite interesting and useful for you to be able to touch base with how much you know about this issue of chronic worry as a problem, and also to give you the beginnings of some pointers of things that we're going to be taking up in the training, really, which I think are pretty central and important to be aware of. And I'll say a little bit about what their implications are and how we'll be dealing with those or addressing those actually during that particular day. So am I going to try and do this poll, Julia, or?
I'm happy to try. Happy to try.
Have a go and see where we go.
Yeah.
See where we go with it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that there will be a poll on the screen in front of you. So just choose the correct answer. In your opinion, what is the correct answer? Don't worry, neither Paul and I nor anybody of the participants can see how you are answering. So nobody's checking whether you are right or wrong. And so it's completely just for your own guidance. So let's try and see how it works. So I'll put it on now. Just 1 second. Let me open the right poll. Relaunch poll. Okay. Has it appeared on the screen, Paul?
Yep, it's appeared on the screen. I'll read through these as we're going along. And once I've read through the questions and the options, if you can vote on these, please, folks. So GAD, which is generalized anxiety disorder or chronic worrying, is a problem that increases with age, and indeed over half of chronic worriers develop it as a problem after they reach their late 40s. Is that true? Is that false? Most people actually develop the problem of chronic worry much earlier, or both the incidence and prevalence of chronic worry doesn't actually change or isn't really affected at all by age. So if you'd like to vote on either true or false, or basically unaffected, folks. So when people chronically worry, does their heart rate go up or down, or doesn't it change at all? Number 3, why is relaxation training an ineffective strategy for helping clients control their chronic worry? It prevents habituation to anxiety-provoking stimuli. It cannot be easily practiced during many of the times that clients are chronically worrying. Relaxation training primarily addresses physiological arousal, which is not a therapeutic focus of GAD, or all of these. Okay. Number 4, what should be the therapeutic aim of CBT with chronic worry? To eliminate it as far as possible, to reduce physiological arousal, to enable the client to live with the uncertainty of life, or all of these? People who chronically worry often have metacognitive beliefs regarding the power or the importance of worry. In such instances, what therapeutic technique might be most useful in addressing this? Use of pie chart, cognitive restructuring, Socratic questioning, or laddering. GAD is often described as a problem relating to intolerance of uncertainty. In this context, which of these is the most accurate description of intolerance of uncertainty? Chronic worriers cannot tolerate the uncertainty of outcomes. Chronic worriers look out for possibilities that are threatening, and both of these. Okay, folks, we still only have, I'm glad to see you're putting answers in now. That's great. That's great. They're all coming through.
Perfect, yeah.
Fantastic. Sorry about that confusion at the beginning, folks. We're not sure what the situation was.
Well, we usually run much shorter polls.
We do.
So,
yeah. Yeah. So we still have 20 odd people, folks, who have.
That's okay. I think 76% is a very good. I'm a glass half full person, so it's positive.
I am, of course, a chronic worrier about the 20 that haven't actually gone.
Not the numbers.
Voted yet.
Okay.
So if you'd like to give me some reassurance, folks, if you'd like to jump in.
It still goes up.
It still goes up, it does. Right, okay, folks.
82% answered, so shall we end it?
We'll end it, yep.
Okay, so thank you, 73 people who answered. Thank you very much. I'll give 2 more seconds for those who are just answering the last questions, and then I'll be ending this poll. So 73 people answered, 84%. That's a fantastic result. And Paul, and share results.
Share results, yeah.
Okay, so again, we can scroll them so you can go through them, Paul. Can you see them on your screen?
Can you see them?
I can see them.
Yeah, great. Okay, folks, let's go through these and look at them one by one, really, because I sort of particularly wanted to ask these questions because they have some quite sort of important implications, really. So I think the first thing to say is that chronic worrying is, and the secret, incidentally, folks, to some degree is in the name. Chronic worrying is something which is typically chronic, and that tends to mean that over half the people who are chronic worriers started chronically worrying, typically either most commonly in childhood, adolescence, or early adulthood. And in fact, one of the things that's quite interesting about this is that actually once you get into your 50s and beyond, chronic worrying can still be a problem for people, but it is not at the same level. So what I wanted to sort of emphasize here was a couple of things, really. I think the first thing to indicate is that at whatever point in time you are seeing a client who has this as a problem, the chances are pretty high that this has not developed recently. The chances are pretty high that it's been going on for a long period of time, which immediately raises the question of why do they actually seek help now rather than earlier? And what we do know is that significant developmental or life milestones often represent a trigger for this. So, you know, if we're talking about children, for instance, changing school, exams would be typical answers for that. But also you can look at things that occur at a later point, change of job, redundancy, change of house, getting married, getting divorced, and so on and so forth. So although this is a chronic problem, in terms of what tends to trigger people to seek help, it tends to be a life event. Now, the fact that it's a chronic problem is actually pretty typical of the vast majority of anxiety-based problems. With regards to low mood and depression, you do have a certain rate of spontaneous recovery. In other words, people get better to a certain degree, or a certain proportion of people get better without actually seeking any therapeutic help. But that is rarer, much rarer with anxiety-based problems. So the general rule of thumb with anxiety-based problems on the whole is that they tend to be unchanging unless treated, but are relatively straightforward and easy to treat, whereas you will tend to find that problems like low mood and depression are often naturally self-limiting, but have a tendency, or a greater tendency, to be recurrent, and also don't respond as well to therapeutic interventions. So in that sort of respect, I guess, generalized anxiety disorder is typical in some ways of other types of anxiety problem. At least in this respect, it is. So for those of you that actually put false, 15% of you, you are correct. Well, what can I say to the others? Bad luck on that one, and I'm sure that you have better luck on some of the other questions, or come along and find out more when we do the training. Now, let's move on to question 2. When people chronically worry, does their heart rate go up or down? 81% of you said up, 3% of you said down, and 16% said no change. Now, this is one of the most interesting things about chronic worrying, which is that when individuals are engaging in chronic worrying, their heart rate goes down. So let me just, which is obvious, can I just say, with the exception of needle and blood phobias, where you get a reduction in blood pressure that occurs with that as a particularly phobic problem, this is obviously unusual with anxiety-based problems. We normally expect, not surprisingly, with fight or flight for people's heart rates to actually go up, and it doesn't with this. And it's worth just saying a little bit about what that's about, because I think to some degree it gets to the nub of what the problem is with chronic worry. If you remember the Jack Rackman quotation that I gave you about an unsuccessful search for safety, says a lot about what's actually happening with chronic worry. Let me just take you through the basic process of what's occurring when somebody starts worrying about something. They are most commonly going to have an intrusive thought that comes into their head. I wonder if I'm going to pass my exams. I wonder if my adolescent child who's out tonight is going to be safe. I wonder if my partner is being faithful, or whatever it is. Now, when that intrusive thought comes into the head, it creates anxiety. And at that particular point, the individual's physiological system will start to respond accordingly. And one of the aspects of that is that the heart rate will go up. But as soon as they start worrying about it, the heart rate goes down. So, when I say worrying about it, so let me come back to this example of the person, the child who has a thought that enters into their head, which is, I wonder if I've done enough revision for an exam. What happens when they worry is they start turning over in their heads basically what is a problem-solving strategy, which is, have I done enough revision? What are my friends saying that they've done? If I was actually on top of all of this, I will be feeling more relaxed about it, and I don't. Now, what's really interesting is that as soon as individuals enter into that chain of problem-solving type thinking, and I'm sure you know what I mean when we're talking about worry. It's not just the idea of something happening. It's all the what ifs that come up. I wonder whether, all of those sorts of questions. As soon as that starts occurring, heart rate goes down. Now, in that respect, one of the things that's quite interesting about chronic worry, for those of you that have any background at all in CBT, is in a strange way, chronic worry in itself is not a problem. Chronic worry is actually a safety behavior. So chronic worry is a safety behavior. It's something that an individual does to try and make themselves feel safer because they perceive a threat. So in that respect, can I say, it's fundamentally no different from, for instance, someone who has a health anxiety and repeatedly seeks reassurance, for instance. In exactly the same way, they are looking for some safety or some way of obtaining a sense of safety through that particular activity. So the first thing to say is I hope that you can immediately see that at the heart of trying to help people who are chronic worriers is not firstly and foremostly the content of the perceived threat. It's the way they are responding to the perceived threat in terms of worrying about it as a way of dealing with it, which actually creates the difficulty. And can I just say, you know, like all safety behaviors, they can become very addictive. Because what tends to happen, of course, with all safety behaviors is that temporarily they take away your anxiety. But actually they don't take it away for very long, so you have to re-engage and do it again. It's exactly the same, you know, with other safety behaviors like drinking, for instance. You know, if I'm feeling anxious about doing something and I go and drink, in the short term, my anxiety levels drop, but actually it's never enough and my anxiety levels come springing up again and I have to drink some more. And that's exactly what's occurring here with worry. So you could think about worry in a strange way as a cognitive addiction. A cognitive addiction, a way that individuals are approaching what they perceive as a threat. Now, one other thing just to add into this, which sort of emphasizes really where, you know, why this could be such a difficult problem to deal with. As soon as you start off with focusing on one particular threat, and you start thinking of, I wonder if they've done so-and-so, or I wonder if such and such will stop this happening. What ends up happening is you start introducing other threats that you hadn't thought about before, because they become part of the what if scenario of the thinking that's going on. So what actually happens is that your threat perception increases. And that's not, and in that respect is neither surprising nor is it something which is necessarily easy to deal with, when you might start off with worrying about one particular thing, but actually before you know it, you're actually worrying about a whole stream of things. And some of them seem to be connected, some of them don't seem to be connected at all. So I start off with worrying about the exams, for example, and whether I'm doing enough. And then that moves on to the worry about whether I'm going to get a job and what I'm going to do if I don't get a job. And what am I going to do if I don't get a job? I guess I might have to go and do such and such, but I can't do such and such because of so and so. And the whole thing starts amplifying. And I think that's one of the key reasons why people who chronically worry feel that they are surrounded by their worry. They never really feel that they get a chance to turn off from it. And for many folks, one of the other temporary respites that they have basically requires them to be doing something. So to be honest with you, if I keep busy or I distract myself, it doesn't work very effectively and it doesn't last for very long, but it gives me some temporary respite from it. But then the problem is, of course, when I go to bed, is I haven't actually got that any longer. I don't have that distraction. Or, for instance, it's very common for people to try and use thought suppression as a strategy for dealing with worry, to just not think about certain things. But that requires quite a high level of cognitive executive functioning, which I mentioned earlier. And when you're trying to doze and get off to sleep, your ability to control that part of your thinking is by definition not at its best. It's not designed to be at its best when we're about to try and rest our brains. So actually people feel they lose control of it just prior to when they actually are trying to get to sleep, or alternatively in the middle of the night when they actually wake up. So why is relaxation training an ineffective strategy for helping clients control their chronic worry? Someone has put in all of these. So what are the answers? It prevents habituation to anxiety-provoking stimuli. I'll come back to that in a moment. It cannot easily be practiced during many of the times when clients are chronically worrying. And relaxation training primarily addresses physiological arousal, which is not a therapeutic focus with GAD. For those of you who thought, oh God, I haven't got a clue on this, I'm going to say all of them are relevant. It was one of those lucky guesses, folks, for those of you that did it, because it is actually all of these. So let's just run through them about why that's the case. If you're not familiar with the language, let me just explain what habituation to anxiety-provoking stimuli means. It's basically the equivalent of face your fears. So in that respect, it's what exposure is about when we use exposure as a therapeutic approach. In other words, if I actually stay with the stimulus that makes me feel anxious, my anxiety levels automatically go down over time. They automatically go down. But that doesn't happen here. Why doesn't it happen here? Because actually the stimulus changes. And you know how I've just mentioned how individuals are in a position where they move from one worry or one perceived threat to another perceived threat to another perceived threat, and so on and so forth. It basically means you never get the chance to habituate or get used to a particular threat. So if you contrast it with a very specific phobia that someone has, for instance, where they expose themselves, let's just take a very simple example of the spider phobia. If the person exposes themselves to that perceived threat, to the spider, their anxiety levels will drop down. But that requires time. And what's actually happening here with chronic worry is that the individual's focus is changing all the time. Okay, so that I think in many ways is the key reason. Secondly, it's basically not easily practiced during many of the times, or relaxation training is not easily practiced during many of the times when people are chronically worrying. It's you know, I think this is, by the way, generally a problem with any type of relaxation exercise. And any of you that have come along to the introductory CBT course that we run will know the difficulties with this and the reasons for it. But this is undoubtedly one of those instances where, at best, relaxation is a preparatory strategy. But the difficulty is in a sense, the target of the anxiety is not fixed. You know, it's not like I am anxious about talking to somebody. It is not that I have anxiety about a spider or whatever. The actual focus of what I am anxious about and worrying about is constantly changing. So in that respect, you know, it's just not very easy to practice this as a technique. And even if you did, to be honest with you, the third one comes into play, which is that relaxation training, not surprisingly in most instances, has its biggest impact on the physiological components of anxiety, whether that is, you know, raised heart rate or breathing or whatever. and that actually this is not a key element of chronic worry. Indeed, can I just say, and we can come back to this point maybe later on if we've got time, what actually happens for some people is that actually their anxiety levels in the form of heart rate actually go down, not only when they are worrying, but if anyone tries to do anything with them to help them to stop worry, their anxiety levels, including their physiological arousal, goes up again. So, and I know that sounds utterly bizarre, but if you remember that chronic worry is about an individual's search for safety, if someone is trying to help you to not worry, this can seem extraordinarily threatening, because worry is seen as the way of keeping safe. And if somehow or other I couldn't worry, then it would be dangerous. That's why, for instance, you get some people who are chronic worriers, not all, but some people who are chronic worriers, who, for instance, will not take a substance which will create any form of physiological relaxation, because they think it's going to take their worrying away. And then their thinking is, well, what the hell would happen if I can't worry? So that's why you get some people who will say, can never have a glass of wine, because, you know, if I have a glass of wine and I start relaxing, then God knows what would happen. Okay, so it brings us back to that idea again, that chronic worry is all about seeking out safety. So what should the therapeutic aim of CBT be with chronic worry? To eliminate it as far as possible, to reduce physiological arousal, to enable the client to live with the uncertainty of life, or all of these. And to be honest with you, I hope by now you will discover that actually reducing physiological arousal is not one of the key aims, in fact. And so it's also worth saying that the therapeutic aim with CBT with chronic worry is not to ever say, don't worry. I was going to come back to this later, but because of time, I'll say something about it briefly now. The argument within CBT is that worry is a useful way of responding to certain problems and certain situations. If I went out of my home down the street into town and I didn't worry about anything, the chances are pretty high I wouldn't live to get to the center of town, because I would just be wandering out into the road and I would get knocked over. So in that respect, CBT is never saying, get rid of worry. In fact, it will be seen as dangerous to do that. What it's actually saying is that actually in many ways, what's happening with chronic worry is that people are trying to use a problem-solving approach with problems which are, strictly speaking, not solvable. So to give you an example of this, of someone I worked with who had numerous worries, but their most pressing one when I saw them just before that particular session was they didn't know when they were going to die. And they were worrying all the time about that, with all sorts of, as you might imagine, other associated worries that tended to be associated in some direct or indirect way with that. Now, in many ways, that is an unanswerable question. It's an unanswerable question. In exactly the same way that it is an unanswerable question that I will definitively know that my adolescent child is going to be safe at 10:30 tonight when they're out. There's no, all of these things actually have a certain uncertainty about them. However, if I'm standing on a curb thinking about crossing the road, and the risk there, or the threat there, is a car coming along and knocking me over, that is a problem which I can apply problem solving to. And in that respect, I have an appropriate level of worry about it. But in that respect, what it's basically saying is that central to the whole issue of helping people who are chronic worriers is addressing their beliefs about the uncertainty of life and learning to somehow or other tolerate that more successfully. And not surprisingly, in the 2-day course that we've got, we go into a fair amount of detail about particular strategies that can be used for that. Number 5, people who chronically worry often have metacognitive beliefs regarding the power or importance of worry. In such instances, what therapeutic technique might be most useful in addressing this? Now, there's lots of metacognitive beliefs associated with worry. Interestingly enough, some of which are actually contradictory. So you'll get some people, for instance, who will have a belief about worry, which is, it is totally outside my control. My thinking is totally and utterly outside of my control, and I can't do anything to stop it. But they will also have, in many instances, a metacognitive belief about the value and importance of worry. They will be saying things like, and I'm sure all of us have heard of people or heard people say this to us. In fact, you may be one of these people yourselves, which is, my goodness, if I didn't worry in this family, who would? If I didn't worry in this family, who would? Now, that's a really interesting metacognitive belief, because it says it's saying a couple of things, really, isn't it? It's saying, first of all, worrying is extremely important, if not crucial, in order to stop bad things happening. And secondly, there's nobody else that's competent enough to do it in my family apart from me. So, bearing that in mind, all of the things that we've got here, by the way, the laddering here, by the way, was made up. I mean, laddering has been used as a therapeutic strategy about 50 years ago, but recently it's not been used. Socratic questioning and cognitive restructuring are valid cognitive techniques to use, but they are not going to get to the nub of the problem with metacognitive beliefs. So let me just put it in a slightly different way what these metacognitive beliefs are, and then it will be clearer, I hope, about which particular technique is most effective. In a sense, what is happening with people's beliefs which say, if I didn't worry in this family, who would? Or that the belief that it's really important to worry in order to stop bad things happening, is that it's attributing far more power to worry as a life strategy than actually exists. To make an obvious point here, if me sitting here worrying about what my 17, 18-year-old son is doing down in the center of town on a Friday night, actually in many ways has very, very, very limited impact on what the outcome actually is that's going to occur on Friday night. And it's actually in many ways largely irrelevant how much I'm going to worry this evening in terms of how safe he will actually be. So when we know that we have an over attribution of something, and this is an example of an over attribution of the power of thinking, of worry, then we know that pie charts are the best way of approaching that within a CBT framework. So for the one of you that identified that, well done. I do appreciate it's a very different way of thinking about the problem, but again, can I just say it's one of the reasons why we've actually got 2 days on this, because it requires, I think, for many folk, a total rethink. Finally, GAD is often described as a problem relating to intolerance of uncertainty. In this context, which of these is the most accurate description of intolerance of uncertainty? Chronic worriers cannot tolerate the uncertainty of outcomes. Chronic worriers look out for possibilities that are threatening. And finally, 85% of you, I do wonder whether again you were hedging your bets here, put down both of these. Now, what's very interesting about this is obviously the term intolerance of uncertainty implies in some particular way that the individual who is a chronic worrier has a low threshold, basically, for being able to tolerate anything that is not certain. Now, what's very interesting about this is that this is actually speaking not typically true of chronic worriers. Chronic worriers tend to have a whole host of things in their lives which are totally uncertain, but which actually they have no problems tolerating at all. In fact, if you think about it, the vast majority of things that are going to be happening for us over the next 24 hours, over the next week, over the next month, over the next year, over the next decade, over the rest of our lives are actually uncertain. But actually, we don't automatically see these as something we can't bear. Having said that, undoubtedly, people who chronically worry do become much more conscious of uncertainty. And through being unconscious of it, by being more conscious of it, not surprisingly, they have difficulties tolerating it because the things that they focus on are the uncertainties regarding threat. One of the things I find quite interesting amongst many of my clients that I work with is that they have all sorts of positive possibilities that might be occurring for them over the next 24 hours, over the next week, over the next month, over the next year, etc., etc. And they have no problems tolerating those. They have no problems tolerating the possibility that they might receive a gift. They have no problems tolerating the question of whether their child will come home from school this afternoon and give them a hug. They don't know whether they will or not, but the uncertainty of that is not something which is an issue for them. So what is actually an issue for them is actually uncertainty associated with threat perception. Now, this, can I say, is not picked up enormously in the literature. And I think it's a shame, because one of the implications of not picking up on it is to see the problem as lying with a general style of response. And actually, I think it's about something else, which is well known within chronic worry. One of them is, I think this is a selective attention problem. Basically, people who chronically worry look out for potential threat. They look out for it. They selectively attend to it. And a lot of these threats they selectively attend to are not concretely solvable through problem solving, but they use a problem solving approach, which doesn't work. So actually, in many instances here, it's the tendency towards threat perception, which is really the nub of the problem. The second thing is one that's recognized very commonly with working with chronic worry, which is about using what is basically a linear problem-solving approach to problems which are not linear and answerable, and which fundamentally require, at the end of the day, acceptance. I don't know what's going to happen to my child at 10:30 this evening. I just don't know. I hope, I trust that he will be safe. Exactly with the same with all the other worries that an individual might have, but there's no guarantees at all. And there's no way of really identifying or finding out whether it's the case. So I mention this because we will say a little bit about this in the training day, because it will represent a slight focus away from some of the literature that's around on intolerance of uncertainty, which has a tendency to view this as a universal, almost personality characteristic of the client, rather than being a perceptual and cognitive style. And that's got some implications. It's got some implications. I won't say anything more about it now, but which we will be picking up during the training day. So folks, I hope that's stimulated. Oh, yes, we got, what's happened here? Oh no, sorry. Yeah, I hope that's stimulated your interest, as well as giving you some interesting thoughts, which hopefully you will not be worrying about too much after we finish this evening. But I do hope to see many of you on the 2-day training. Yeah, I will pass you back to Julia at this particular point.
Thank you, Paul. Well, as always, Paul was very worried that he doesn't have enough material for tonight's Thursday. And as always, he brought us right up to 8 o'clock when we normally finish. Can I just say a few things? I put a few links into the chat box, and I will put the link to SDS main site again, because the 3 courses which we're running next. So next week, Paul is running working with OCD, and I know some of you mentioned OCD Thursday last time, 2 weeks ago, which was a very interesting event. So have a look at that Thursday on YouTube and come to OCD course if you can. It's a 1-day course and it is on Tuesday next week. Then he will be running the course on generalized anxiety disorder. And if you have questions after tonight, Paul will be able to answer them all during the course. And as I said, book it today or tomorrow for early bird discount, but then you'll still have late discount, so it won't go straight to the full price. It only comes into effect in the last 5 days before the course. So think of the working with GAD as an option. And the last thing I've noticed Paul mentioned several times, CBT introductory course. It's a 3-day training, and it's really, I would say, state-of-the-art training, because it's probably the best course on CBT, no matter whether you're a CBT therapist or not. I think it's a perfect way of introducing you to how CBT works and enabling you to start using it with your clients, no matter whether you're a CBT therapist or not. But there's enough elements of it which are applicable to your clients. So I do suggest consider doing that course if it is just the only training you do this year. So all these courses are on SDS website. I hope you all know how to find SDS website, but if you don't, I'm putting it in the chat box again. So thank you very much for coming, Paul. Thank you very much for very interesting format. I think it was fascinating to check our own answers before hearing yours. And we'll be meeting again for SDS Thursday, but I hope I will see you before that at one of our courses. Take care. You can unmute yourself, say your goodbyes and thank yous, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Take care, folks. Look after yourself.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Yourselves. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now. Take care.